This is John Einreinhofer here with another West Virginia University basketball report, this time NCAA Tournament Sweet 16 edition. This is for thegruelingtruth.net, and this podcast is sponsored by my law offices, the law offices of John Einreinhofer, focusing on personal injury, employment and insurance law in West Virginia, New Jersey, and Ohio. You can reach me on the net at johnelaw.com, Facebook at Law Offices of John Einreinhofer, and you can check me out on Twitter at RealJohnnyLaw. West Virginia will be taking on Gonzaga in San Jose, California in their Sweet 16 matchup. The matchup will be Thursday night. It's going to be broadcast by TBS, and it's going to start at 7:39 p.m. West Virginia got there by a huge victory over former Big East rival Notre Dame. WVU won that one 83-71. Started off with a 10-0 run, never looked back. Javon Carter, the Big 12's Defensive Player of the Year, showed fully what he can do on offense when he's hot, as he scored 24 points, hitting a few huge threes in that one. And Buffalo was the charm again for West Virginia, as a site as it was in 2010 when they reached the Final Four. This is the third Sweet 16 appearance for West Virginia since 2010. In that win over Notre Dame, Tariq Phillip also chipped in with 12 points. Issa Ahmad has continued to look back from his absence when he missed 3 games with back spasms near the end of the season. He had 9 rebounds and 11 points, just barely missing the double-double. And he looks like the all-around player and factor that he had started to develop into this season before he slumped a little bit and got hurt. That is certainly big for WVU heading into the Sweet 16 round. Daxter Miles, who in the last game of the regular season against Iowa State tied a career high with 23 points. He had 18 against Notre Dame, and when his offense is clicking and he's contributing, that's also big for the Mountaineers. Elijah Macon has continued his extremely strong play in the last third of the season. He had double figures in points with 11, and going into this matchup with Gonzaga, he is going to be key. In that game against Notre Dame, Sags Kanate and Brandon Watkins' minutes were a little bit down, but they're going to also be key factors in the matchup against Gonzaga, when WVU will need every big man available to take fouls when necessary and match up with Gonzaga's size. We'll be getting more into that in a little bit. A longtime Big East rival coach of Notre Dame, Mike Bray, was very complimentary of West Virginia after the Mountaineers' victory. Coach Bray was commenting on how the Mountaineers had the look of a very strong NCAA team, especially with their older veteran players, which now in the age of one and done is important. Of course, that's the idea. You want to have players hanging around, being with your program for as many years as possible, especially if you're in WVU situation. Not everybody can be John Calipari in Kentucky, or even Bill Self in Kansas for that matter. And the Mountaineers and Bob Huggins showing a successful way to do it. Again, the Mountaineers in the Sweet 16 for the third time since 2010. Meanwhile, Gonzaga was beating Northwestern 79-73. Northwestern was making their first NCAA tournament appearance in school history in this tournament. Gonzaga opened up a 22-point first-half lead against Northwestern, but they let the Wildcats back into the ball game, and it was certainly a game down the stretch. A controversial goaltending call going against Northwestern with 4:53 left to play really set Northwestern's comeback back, and Gonzaga was able to hang on for the victory. Nigel Williams-Goss, the 6'3", 195-pound guard, had 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists. Big game for Gonzaga. And he's going to be important, of course, as Gonzaga is going to have to contend with WVU's press. Gonzaga's top big man, Premchik Karnowski, from Torun, Poland, was a little bit quiet against Northwestern, but his backup freshman Zach Collins, one of their other 7-foot-plus big men, was able to pick up a bit of the slack, chip in with 14 points, and help Gonzaga hang on for that victory. Mountaineers and Gonzaga will actually be the second game of the night Thursday. Former WVU coach John Beilein has Michigan on a roll. Michigan looking very strong, of course, won the Big Ten tournament. And you know John Beilein, he's always had players that can shoot three-pointers, move the ball, and plays a lot of that 1-3-1 defense, of course. And now he's got a big man in Mo Wagner. And I don't think John Beilein's ever had a big man like that. So Michigan looking dangerous right now. And even though they're the lower seed, they are favored over Oregon. They'll be playing on CBS. They get the CBS game just about a half an hour before the Mountaineers on Thursday night. Taking a more detailed look at the Mountaineers matchup with Gonzaga, they'll be played at the SAP Center in San Jose. It's got a capacity of 17,496. And, of course, it's on the West Coast, and Gonzaga, a West Coast school, anticipated they would have more fans there than the Mountaineers, but I don't anticipate that that'll be too big of a factor. Mountaineers got to fly out to California yesterday and get to San Jose. Time to settle in, this being the Thursday game. They played on Saturday. They're used to some tight travel in the Big 12, which, speaking of the Big 12, one of the things I like about the Mountaineers' chances against Gonzaga on Thursday is that the Big 12, after being touted more and more during the regular season in recent years, and of course Kansas always the flagship program, but generally being disappointing in the tournament in recent years, this to me looks like the year the Big 12 is living up to expectations. Kansas, Baylor, and the Mountaineers all still left in the Sweet 16, and basketball fanatics might want to also note that TCU is in the quarterfinals of the NIT. I myself just got a little bit of that feeling as the Mountaineers had the key matchup with Notre Dame. Of course, the Mountaineers seeded 4th, Notre Dame seeded 5th. Most pundits picking Notre Dame going into that one. You had a good feeling as the game went on that the Mountaineers had been battle-tested from all that tight competition in the Big 12 this year. The tough opponents, the overtime games, the close games, and I, for one, had a good feeling from that throughout that Notre Dame game that the Mountaineers were ready for that kind of testing, and they did live up to it. Another reason that matters to me is that even though Gonzaga is 34-1, of course, obviously if you have that kind of record, no matter where you're playing, you're a good team. But they're in the West Coast Conference. And even though Villanova's out, if you look at the way the NCAA committee has seeded the tournament this year with the seeds that are left, they've been very accurate, and Gonzaga is the weakest of the 4 number 1 seeds. Of course, Villanova has been eliminated, but Gonzaga is the weakest of the number 1s. So the Mountaineers draw them in their region. Of course, the Mountaineers being a 4 seed, time to play the number 1 seed if things play out true to form, and in that sense it has for WVU. Gonzaga the opponent. But if you're going to have to play a number 1 seed in the first game of the Sweet 16, you want it to be the weakest number 1 seed, and that's Gonzaga. One potential problem for the Mountaineers, if you want to have things to be concerned about, is that Gonzaga is the number 2 team nationally in field goal percentage defense. I think back to the Mountaineers' second-round Big 12 tournament game where they played a tough Kansas State defensive team, had a lot of trouble scoring, and only shot 27% in that game. However, even though you're playing for pride, you want to win it. with teams in the power conferences knowing that they're going to the NCAAs at that point, and if you looked at the way things were seeded, none of the seeds really changed based on the conference tournaments. Duke won the ACC, and they were still a number 2 seed. So the incentive not there as it may have been in the past in the conference tournaments. So I don't think you have to put that much stock in that for the Mountaineers. But Gonzaga is a team that's going to challenge you on the boards. I've mentioned Karnowski. He goes 7'1", 300 pounds, averages 12.4 points per game. Their leading rebounder, though, is actually the 6'9" Jonathan Williams. So Karnowski is not their leading rebounder. Zach Collins, a freshman, goes 7'0", 230. He plays a lot off the bench. He's averaging double figures off the bench at 10.3 points per game and 5.7 rebounds. They have another freshman that gets some playing time off the bench, Killian Tillis, who's 6'10", 200. One concern for the Mountaineers is that they did face Karnowski in the 2013-2014 season up in Morgantown, and Karnowski hung 19 points and 13 rebounds on him in an 80-76 Gonzaga victory. But the only current Mountaineers on that team were Nathan Adrian, who was a freshman. He came off the bench and had 3 points. Brandon Watkins was also a freshman. He did not play in that game, but they will be two of the bigger players for the Mountaineers in this game, size-wise. And, of course, Nathan Adrian has made tremendous improvements since he was a freshman. Brandon Watkins will team up with Sags Kanate and Elijah Macon to try to slow down the Gonzaga big men, such as Karnowski and Collins. Macon goes 6'9". Then the Mountaineers have Adrian at 6'8", Ahmad 6'8", Watkins 6'8". Even though not all of these players, Kanate 6'8", will be going up against the big men. It'll be Macon, Kanate, and Watkins. They can switch off, and they should be able to hold their own there. Kanate proving as a freshman to be a tremendous shot blocker himself. I think he should be able to bring plenty for Gonzaga to have to handle defensively. And also Elijah Macon, over the last 12 games, has seemed to make tremendous strides. He has been living up to more of the expectations that the Mountaineers originally had for him when he came to Morgantown. I think the wise rule is never to ignore the odds makers, because even though their objective in gambling terms, when they come out to Las Vegas, and the only place in the United States where sports betting is legal, their objective obviously is to get even money put on both sides, plays on both teams, but they have to know, the bookmakers that they pay have to know what they're doing. They're always going to know a little bit more than you do, because that's their job and their livelihood depends on it. So taking a look at that, I think it's encouraging for WVU. They're only a 3-point underdog to Gonzaga. And I also like that they talk about the Zags defense, but the over-under, in other words, the projected total points, the over-under line, 148.5. Considering that you would consider, obviously, these to be two top defensive teams, I think the Mountaineers have had their best offense since 2010. I've been saying it almost all season. And when they can score along with the defense that they play is when they're such a dangerous team. I like the level of that over-under line, that the game will be high enough scoring, even though the odds makers are basically projecting the game to be 76, 73, somewhere around there. So still in the 70s. When you see the Mountaineers putting up those points in the 80s, they're in good shape. That's close enough for me. Talked about Elijah Macon. He's going to be real key in this game because of Gonzaga's size. In his last 12, Macon is averaging 9.5 points per game and 6.5 rebounds per game. So working his way up there. Certainly nothing spectacular yet, but the Mountaineers have a very balanced attack. That's something also that they bring that other teams don't. They really have a true team game. It was Javon Carter stepping up against Notre Dame, but with the Mountaineers, it can be a few different players on a given night, and I think that makes them actually tougher to stop. Also, looking at what other experts are saying, you see a lot of the experts reseeding the teams in a Sweet 16, just, of course, a theoretical exercise. I see the Mountaineers getting more respect in the reseeding of the 16 teams left, being picked about sixth out of who's left, if they were theoretically to be reseeded. But I still don't see people picking the Mountaineers over Gonzaga. I do think that the Mountaineers will win this one. I projected this game at the start of my brackets in the West. The West I've seen play out pretty well. I figured that Arizona would still be left. I thought that the Mountaineers would take Gonzaga on at this point, and I think that the Mountaineers will win. I think the Mountaineers' offense is enough in gear. I think that their press, well, Gonzaga will still be focusing on ball handlers handling the ball to break the press. I think when the Mountaineers speed people up, make them play the way they don't want to play with the press, when it is working, it will force the big men to handle the ball a little bit more and a little bit more positions that they don't want to for Gonzaga. I think that that's going to help the Mountaineers. Also, incorporating the 1-3-1 zone as the season went along. When you're playing a team with big men like this, it's good that the Mountaineers have the 1-3-1 available. Even though you could look at the fact that the 1-3-1 can be considered weak on the baseline, it's still good that the Mountaineers can go to a zone look against this kind of team if needed. And I think even though slightly undersized compared to Gonzaga, I think that the Mountaineers' big men that they'll throw at them, Macon, Konate, and Watkins, can get the job done. If Javon Carter and Daxter Miles stay hot like they have been, Tariq Phillip also playing very well, with those guards then chipping in offensively like they've been chipping in, Nathan Adrian still playing very good defense at the head of that press, getting his hands on a lot of balls, more balls than ever, so he's playing very well defensively. And Issa Ahmad back in form at 6'8", he gives you a long all-around threat. Speaking of the odds are out as to what the experts think with regards to who will win the West Regional, which of course is West Virginia's region. Arizona, the number 2 seed in the region, is actually favored at this point by the odds makers. They're a 6-5 pick to win the West Regional. Gonzaga, second. Of course, that's not good for the Mountaineers in terms of expert opinion. Gonzaga considered 8-5 to win the regional. Then it's the Mountaineers at 4-1, and then Xavier brings up the rear. They're a very long shot at 25-1 to win the regional. They're the only double-digit seed remaining in the tournament, and that's another thing that has really gone the Mountaineers' way. Xavier blasted out Florida State. The ACC having a disastrous tournament. And I'm sure Mountaineer fans are not sad to see that. They've only got one team left in the tournament, North Carolina, a complete disaster, as the Big 12 is living up to expectations so far this season. It's the ACC that has had the bottom drop out. But let's say Xavier does pull the upset. They were hot against Florida State. They took out Maryland. They're the only double-digit team remaining in the tournament. So if the Mountaineers beat Gonzaga, Xavier pulls an upset, they could be playing a double-digit seed. Even if things play true to form and Arizona beats Xavier, which I think that they will, going into the tournament, I did pick Arizona as the team to win the West Regional. But now the Mountaineers' offense is playing well enough that I am ready to pick a Mountaineer team that gets by Gonzaga over Arizona if that indeed becomes the matchup. Even though going into the tournament, I had the Mountaineers going to the Elite Eight and losing to Arizona. I just call it like I see it. Even though being someone that follows the Mountaineers, I like to make the right pick. But I think that the Mountaineers now, the offense is fully back in gear. I thought it would get in gear enough to get to the Elite Eight. I think they're capable of taking it further at this point. And if you want to project a little bit further with who's left, I think it could be good for the Mountaineers because Kansas is, now let's look at the odds to win the NCAA, what the odds makers say. Kansas is now the favorite to win the whole thing at this point with the 16 teams left. The odds makers have them at 9-2. North Carolina's second at 5-1. Then they've got Gonzaga and Arizona both 6-1. UCLA 8-1. Kentucky 10-1. Florida 12-1. Baylor at 15-1. Michigan 15-1, Oregon 20-1, and the Mountaineers 20-1, along with Wisconsin and Purdue. Then the real long shots are Butler at 40-1, South Carolina at 40-1, and Xavier at 50-1. Xavier, the longest shot to win the tournament at this point, according to the odds makers. One of West Virginia's two possible opponents left. It'll be them or Arizona if the Mountaineers get by Gonzaga, which I think they will, pull the upset, but not a huge upset as the Mountaineers only 3-point underdogs. If you want to get a little perspective, Arizona's 7.5-point favorite over Xavier. North Carolina's 7.5 over Butler. So the Mountaineers not big underdogs here, according to the odds makers. But again, if you want to just project a little bit ahead, Kansas is coming from the other side, so if you want to look far ahead, but at this point in the Sweet 16 is not too far ahead, Kansas would be one of WVU's potential title game opponents if the Mountaineers can win a couple more. But before that, potential opponents in the Final Four for the Mountaineers, Baylor's still out there. Of course, the Mountaineers beat Baylor in Morgantown. Mountaineers beat Kansas in Morgantown. Lost to both those teams on the road. In Baylor, it slipped away in the second half for the Mountaineers. And in Kansas, we know the story of that one. The Mountaineers up huge very late in the game, and then it slipped away in overtime. Of course, Michigan's still out there. If they would come out of the Midwest instead of Kansas, that would be a potential title game opponent. That would certainly be an interesting matchup, getting to face former coach John Beilein with everything on the line. That's what's good about getting to the Sweet 16 is that your fantasy as a Mountaineer fan gets to continue for a while longer. Dream these dreams while you can, because we know how long the off seasons can be. Once you get a loss, despite the fact that the Mountaineers have had a good run this year getting to the Sweet 16 no matter what, I think they still have a few more wins in them. A national title game, who knows? Not out of the question, I don't think, at this point, the way they're playing. But a big obstacle, literally, in Gonzaga with their big men Thursday night in San Jose. As I said, I have the Mountaineers beating Gonzaga. I think that they'll play Arizona in the Elite Eight, and I think that the way the Mountaineers are playing now, that I'm ready to pick them over Arizona. Even though going into the tournament, I had that as an Elite Eight game, and I picked Arizona. Now, this is John Einreinhofer. I want to thank you for joining me on the West Virginia University basketball NCAA Sweet 16 preview on thegruelingtruth.net. Again, this has been sponsored by my law offices, the law offices of John Einreinhofer, personal injury, employment and insurance law in West Virginia, New Jersey, and Ohio. You can reach me on the net at johnelaw.com, Facebook at the law offices of John Einreinhofer, and follow me on Twitter at RealJohnELaw. Thanks for joining me on thegruelingtruth.net.